The grand arena of the Dragon Council shimmered in the sunlight, its floating platforms stretching high into the sky. Crowds of dragons and humans alike gathered, their voices echoing across the open space. Among them, Zevik, a young dragon rider, stood tall on the central platform, his armor glinting and his chest puffed with pride. He raised his hand and the audience fell silent. "Talmar will never kneel before any human," he declared, his voice ringing with confidence. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. Zevik's claim was bold, arrogant even, but he wore it like armor. Talmar, his dragon, was a magnificent beast. Scales of deep emerald shimmered in the sunlight, wings stretching wide enough to cast shadows over the arena floor. Its golden eyes were sharp, intelligent, and fierce. Zevik patted Talmar's snout and whispered commands. The dragon responded with precise, controlled movements, demonstrating power and obedience. Every twist, turn, and flare of Talmar's wings seemed designed to awe the audience, and it worked. Gasps and murmurs followed every demonstration. Zevik's confidence grew with each movement, his grin widening. Among the crowd sat Mira, a young human girl with dark hair and sharp eyes, who had grown up alone on the outskirts of the Dragon City. She had no family, no formal training, but she had learned to survive. Mira had seen dragons from afar and had learned their habits, their ways of communicating without words. She studied Zevik and Talmar closely, noting subtle moments when Talmar hesitated or flicked its tail in uncertainty. To most, it would have seemed insignificant, but Mira saw opportunity. She was small, weak in the eyes of the council, but her mind was sharp and her heart steady. Zevik continued to boast, demonstrating Talmar's strength with daring leaps and spins in the air. He pushed the dragon through fire and wind maneuvers, showcasing not just power but control. "No human will ever command Talmar," he shouted. The crowd cheered, dragons raising their wings in approval, humans murmuring their doubts. Zevik's arrogance was clear. He wanted everyone to believe that he and his dragon were unbeatable, untouchable, untamed by the weak. Yet Mira noticed the faintest flicker of hesitation in Talmar's golden eyes, a small pause between commands. To her, it was a crack in the armor of pride. The young girl felt a rush of determination. She had grown up watching humans dismissed and belittled, treated as fragile and unworthy by the dragons. But she knew that strength came in many forms, not just fire, claws, or size. Sometimes, courage and understanding could match or surpass brute force. Mira raised her hands slowly, deliberately, drawing the attention of those around her. The arena hushed instantly. Whispers spread like wind through the crowd. Who was this human girl daring to step forward? Zevik's laughter echoed through the arena. "What is this?" he demanded. "Does a child think she can challenge me?" His voice dripped with scorn. Talmar lowered its wings slightly, sensing Zevik's tension. Mira did not falter. She stood tall, her eyes never leaving the dragon. Her small hand remained raised, a gesture of calm confidence rather than defiance. For a moment the world seemed to pause. Dragons tilted their heads, observing her, curious. Humans leaned forward, eyes wide with disbelief and hope. Myra's presence alone seemed to challenge the arrogance of Zevik. She stepped closer to the edge of the platform, careful not to provoke Talmar with sudden movements. Myra's gaze studied the dragon's body language. The flick of its tail, the tension in its wings, the slight shift in its stance. Zevik shouted orders, expecting Talmar to obey instantly, but the dragon hesitated slightly, as if sensing a new force, something unfamiliar. Myra's heart raced, but she remained calm. She understood that she did not need to force the dragon to obey. She only needed to show patience, understanding, and courage. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Mira extended her hand, palm open and steady. It was not a gesture of dominance, nor a command. It was an offering, a bridge of trust to a creature that had never knelt to a human before. Talmar's golden eyes focused on her, scanning her small frame with intense curiosity. Zevik's pride faltered for the first time, his voice rising in frustration as he tried to maintain control. "Talmar, obey me," he barked. But Talmar only hesitated, its gaze fixed on Mira. Mira took a careful step forward, her movements slow and deliberate. She did not speak, knowing that sudden noise or movement could startle Talmar. Instead, she radiated calm, letting the dragon sense her presence without fear or aggression. The young dragon rider gritted his teeth, realizing that his claim, that Talmar would never kneel, was now being quietly challenged by this small, orphaned girl. The audience held its breath. Humans leaned forward, dragons watched silently, and even the elders of the council frowned, sensing that something unprecedented was occurring. Minutes passed in this tension, but Mira did not waver. She kept her hand raised, eyes steady, showing respect and understanding rather than fear. Talmar shifted its massive head slightly, sniffing the air, scanning her movements. There was a quiet intelligence in the dragon's eyes, a spark of curiosity that Mira had hoped to ignite. Zevik's voice grew harsher, commands sharper, but the dragon resisted, drawn not by fear or force but by Mira's calm presence. Finally, a subtle change occurred. Talmar lowered its head slightly, not fully kneeling, but bending just enough to show recognition of Mira's hand. The arena gasped. Whispers turned into murmurs of astonishment. Zevik's face flushed with anger and disbelief. Mira did not smile or boast. She simply held her hand steady, letting the dragon see her respect and sincerity. It was the first connection she had made with Talmar, the beginning of a bond that no arrogance or command could break. As Mira stepped back, the audience erupted in quiet applause. Humans looked at her with newfound hope, realizing that courage and patience could match strength and power. Even some dragons tilted their heads, intrigued by this unusual human who had dared to challenge a dragon rider's pride. Zevik glared at her, seething, but he could not deny what had occurred. The orphan girl had made the first move, proving that even in a world dominated by dragons, humans could act with intelligence, courage, and heart. Mira lowered her hand slowly, keeping her calm composure, and stepped away from the edge. Talmar remained attentive, its golden eyes following her, curious and aware. Zevik's claim, that his dragon would never kneel, had been quietly, subtly challenged. And though nothing had been fully proven yet, the balance of power had shifted. Mira had shown that understanding, respect, and courage could open doors that brute strength could not. The arena buzzed with energy, and for the first time, Mira felt that she was not just a small, powerless human. She had raised her hand, and in doing so she had raised hope, for herself, for her kind, and perhaps for a new future where humans and dragons could learn from one another rather than fear each other. Mira stood at the edge of the arena, her small frame barely noticeable compared to the towering dragons and their riders. Yet her presence carried a quiet strength. Zevik's eyes burned with anger as he saw her hand raised, challenging his claim that Talmar would never kneel. He snapped his fingers sharply, commanding Talmar to return to him, but the dragon hesitated, its golden eyes flicking toward Mira. The crowd murmured in astonishment. No human had ever dared confront a dragon this way, and certainly not in front of the council. Mira's heart pounded, but she did not move back. She had learned long ago that courage was not loud or brash, it was steady, calm, and deliberate. She took a slow step forward, keeping her gaze fixed on Talmar. The dragon shifted, wings slightly flexing, tail flicking nervously, but it did not retreat. Mira remembered the lessons she had learned while surviving alone on the outskirts of the Dragon City. Patience, observation, and understanding were as powerful as fire or strength. She extended her hand once more, palm open, fingers relaxed. She spoke softly, though no one could hear her words over the murmurs of the crowd. Her tone carried calmness, an invitation, not a command. Zevik's voice rose sharply. "Talmar, obey me," he shouted, stepping forward. His pride and anger made his movements exaggerated, desperate to regain control. Talmar tilted its massive head, ears flicking at his voice, but it did not move. Mira took another step, feeling the rhythm of the dragon's movements. She noticed the slight tension in its neck, the way its eyes tracked her carefully. This was no ordinary beast, it was intelligent, capable of thought and choice. If she remained calm and steady, she could reach it in a way Zevik never could. The council elders leaned forward, intrigued. They had never seen a human challenge a dragon rider so openly. Mira did not waver under their gaze or the expectant eyes of the crowd. She understood that this was not just about proving her own courage. It was about showing that humans could form bonds with dragons through understanding rather than force. Slowly, she crouched slightly, lowering herself to the dragon's level without appearing weak. Her movements were deliberate, respectful, and careful. Talmar sniffed the air, tail twitching. It moved closer to the edge of the platform, drawn by Mira's calm presence. The crowd gasped, and Zevik's face flushed with frustration. He tried to regain control, commanding Talmar with sharper tones, pulling on the reins, but the dragon only shifted slightly, still observing Mira. The golden eyes of the beast were fixed on her hand, the one she kept raised steadily. Mira sensed that Talmar was testing her patience, assessing whether she was steady enough to interact safely. She stayed completely still, letting the tension pass between them without acting in fear. Minutes passed like hours. Mira took another careful step, her eyes never leaving Talmar. She slowly reached out, brushing the tips of her fingers against the dragon's massive snout. The scales were surprisingly warm, smooth in some areas, rough in others. Talmar inhaled deeply, nostrils flaring, and Mira could feel the intelligence in its breath, the awareness that she was not just a child or a weak human. She whispered softly, barely audible, "I am not your enemy." Zevik growled in frustration, but the dragon did not move. Mira continued, speaking in quiet tones, tracing gentle patterns on the dragon's snout. She mirrored its slight head movements, letting Talmar see that she was attentive, observant, and respectful. Slowly, the dragon lowered its head slightly, a movement so subtle that only someone paying careful attention would notice. It was not submission but recognition. The crowd fell silent, sensing the change, unsure what to make of it. Seeing Talmar's slight bow, Mira smiled faintly. She did not push further, understanding that trust could not be forced. She stayed calm, steady, and patient, letting the dragon come to her in its own time. Zevik's anger grew, but he realized that Talmar was no longer responding only to him. The dragon had made a choice, and Mira's presence had influenced it. The arena was filled with tension, a mix of astonishment, fear, and excitement. Mira then took another small step, extending her hand fully to Talmar's side. The dragon's wings flexed, and it leaned into her touch slightly, golden eyes meeting hers. It was a quiet gesture but powerful. The audience erupted into whispers and murmurs. Humans looked at her with amazement, realizing that even a small, orphan girl could achieve what they had never dreamed possible. Dragons watched silently, some tilting their heads, intrigued by this human who had dared to act with respect, intelligence, and courage. Zevik clenched his fists, realizing that his boast had been challenged in the most unexpected way. His pride had demanded control, yet Talmar had chosen Mira's calm approach over his commands. The realization stung. He tried to shout louder to regain authority, but the dragon's attention remained on Mira. She did not boast, she did not shout. She simply held her hand steady, demonstrating patience and understanding. By the time she stepped back slightly, Talmar's head remained lowered, still attentive to her presence. Mira had made the first real connection with the dragon. She had proven that humans, even small and underestimated, could influence dragons not by force, but by observation, courage, and respect. The crowd erupted in applause, some cheering, some murmuring in awe. Even Zevik could not deny what had happened. Mira lowered her hand slowly, never taking her eyes off Talmar. The dragon's gaze remained fixed on her, intelligent and curious. She had challenged the arrogance of the young rider and made a subtle but powerful statement. Humans could be more than weak creatures. They could think, adapt, and form bonds with dragons stronger than fear or dominance. As the arena settled into quiet chatter, Mira stepped away from the edge, feeling a strange mix of relief and determination. She had begun a journey that would not only challenge Zevik and his pride but also show the council, the dragons, and her own kind that courage and intelligence could achieve what brute strength never could. Talmar's slight acknowledgement of her presence was just the beginning. Mira walked away from the platform, small yet unshakable, and in her heart, she knew that the real challenge was only starting. The dragons had noticed her, the council had noticed her, and Zevik would have to face the fact that his dragon's loyalty could be questioned. A new balance was forming, one that humans might influence if they dared to act with patience, courage, and understanding. Mira had never been this close to a dragon before. Talmar's massive form filled the space before her, wings folded but tense, eyes golden and intelligent, observing her every movement. The arena had quieted, the crowd leaning forward in anticipation, but Mira blocked them out. She knew that if she wanted to form a bond with Talmar, she could not rely on force or speed. She needed patience, understanding, and attention. One wrong gesture could frighten the dragon or worse, make Zevik lash out in frustration. She crouched slightly, letting her small size seem non-threatening. Talmar's eyes followed her, blinking slowly, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air around her. Mira extended her hand, not too quickly, not too slowly, just enough for the dragon to notice her presence. She whispered softly, her voice low and calm, "I am not here to hurt you." The sound of her words carried a warmth that she hoped Talmar could feel, even if it did not understand her language. The dragon's head tilted slightly, one ear flicking. Mira noticed the subtle signs. The way Talmar's tail twitched, how its wings flexed, the small, almost imperceptible shifts in its posture. It was testing her just as she had tested it. She mirrored its movements subtly, leaning when it leaned, stepping back when it stepped. Slowly, she began to understand the rhythm of Talmar's body language. The dragon was not wild or cruel, It was intelligent, cautious, and aware. And it respected those who moved with care and attention. Zevik watched from the platform, scowling. He barked orders at Talmar, pulling the reins and shouting sharp commands, but the dragon ignored him, focusing instead on Mira. Frustration clouded Zevik's face, but Mira did not let it shake her. She had learned that fear and anger were useless here. Only calm, deliberate understanding could reach Talmar. She took another careful step forward, extending her palm fully toward the dragon's snout. Talmar leaned in slightly, sniffing her fingers, still cautious but curious. Mira remembered the stories she had heard as a child, tales of humans forming bonds with dragons long ago. Those bonds were built not on control but on respect, trust, and patience. She repeated gentle gestures, moving her hand in slow arcs that Talmar could follow. She traced the edge of its jaw, letting the dragon feel her touch without pressure. Talmar shifted, leaning into the touch slightly, a small but important acknowledgement. Myra's heart lifted. She had made the first real connection. Zevik's voice grew sharper, angry at Talmar's disobedience. "Talmar, obey me now," he shouted. The dragon flinched but did not move toward Zevik. Mira stayed calm, placing her other hand near Talmar's foreleg without touching it, showing respect and patience. The golden eyes of the dragon remained fixed on her, scanning her movements, testing her intentions. Mira understood that Talmar was evaluating her as much as she was evaluating it. She nodded gently, letting the dragon know she would not harm it. As moments passed, Mira noticed something remarkable. Talmar's breathing began to slow, the tension in its body easing just slightly. The tail flicked less sharply and the wings relaxed in small increments. Mira realized that the dragon was beginning to trust her presence. She whispered softly again, "You are safe. I'm not your enemy." The arena was still, everyone watching as this small human girl quietly, patiently, and carefully bridged a gap that no one had thought possible. She continued her gentle gestures, running her fingertips along Talmar's scales, feeling their warmth and texture. The dragon did not pull away, instead it leaned closer, lowering its head slightly. Myra's small hand rested lightly on the dragon's snout. No words were needed. In that simple touch, a silent communication passed between them. Trust, understanding, and recognition formed a bond stronger than force or threats. Myra's heart swelled with quiet triumph. Zevik's anger grew, but he could not force Talmar to obey him. The dragon had chosen to pay attention to Myra's calm presence, not his loud commands. The council elders watched closely, some frowning, some intrigued, as they realized that humans might not be as weak or insignificant as they had believed. Mira had already begun changing their perceptions with her actions alone. Mira continued to move slowly around Talmar, observing his reactions. She noticed small signs of discomfort, subtle muscle twitches, and tiny movements that indicated uncertainty. She adjusted her gestures accordingly, leaning back slightly, letting the dragon lead the rhythm. Each motion was a lesson in patience and respect. Mira understood that forming a bond with a dragon required more than courage. It demanded observation, care, and empathy. Hours seemed to pass in the quiet dance between human and dragon. Talmar began to follow Myra's subtle guidance, stepping forward when she stepped forward, turning its massive head in the direction she indicated. It was not obedience, not yet, but recognition. The crowd murmured, whispers spreading through the arena. Humans exchanged glances, astonished by the skill and bravery of the young girl. Even some dragons tilted their heads, intrigued by this human who had approached their kind without fear or arrogance. Finally, Mira took a deep breath and extended both hands slowly toward Talmar, palms open and calm. The dragon lowered its head further, allowing her to touch the top of its snout. It was a small gesture but monumental. In that simple act, Mira understood Talmar's intelligence, awareness, and capacity to trust. She had reached the dragon in a way that no human before her had. The arena erupted in whispers of awe. Zevik's face flushed with disbelief and anger. He had boasted that Talmar would never kneel, yet here was a human earning recognition from the very creature he claimed was untouchable. Mira stepped back slightly, keeping her hand raised, letting Talmar process the interaction. The golden eyes of the dragon remained fixed on her, alert, intelligent, and curious. She had learned that understanding a dragon was not about power or dominance. It was about observation, patience, and empathy. She had made the first step in forming a bond that would challenge Zevik's pride and change the way humans and dragons could relate forever. By the end of the day, Mira had proven that a human could communicate and connect with a dragon without force. Talmar had not yet fully obeyed, but it had acknowledged her presence and her intent. A bond had begun to form, quiet and subtle, yet unbreakable in its potential. Mira walked away from the arena's edge, small but confident, knowing that this was only the beginning of a journey that would redefine what humans could achieve among dragons. The arena was quieter than usual that morning. A tense hush spread across the crowd as the council announced the next challenge, a test of loyalty. Zevik's boast, that Talmar would never kneel, was about to be tested in front of everyone. The challenge was simple to state but impossible to predict. Talmar must follow the commands of a human or fail the trial. The audience waited with bated breath, curious to see if Mira, the orphan girl who had already begun forming a bond with Talmar, could succeed where others had failed. Zevik stepped forward, scowling. "This is impossible. No dragon will ever obey a human," he said, his voice full of anger and disbelief. Talmar shifted slightly, eyeing Zevik and then Mira, who stood calmly near the arena's edge. Myra's heart raced, but she did not show fear. She had learned patience and observation, and she understood that the trial would not be won by force or shouting. It would be won through trust, understanding and careful guidance. The council signaled and the test began. A simple course had been set up. Talmar needed to move through a series of gates, avoid obstacles and complete maneuvers that required precision and awareness. Zevik called loudly, attempting to command Talmar through the course, but the dragon's golden eyes remained fixed on Mira. It flicked its tail and flexed its wings, clearly attentive but hesitant to obey its rider. Mira stepped closer, raising her hands slowly, her movements deliberate and steady. She spoke softly, a calm voice amid Zevik's loud commands. "Talmar, follow me," she said, letting her gestures guide the dragon. She moved to the first gate, stepping with care, showing the dragon the path. Talmar blinked, then moved its massive body forward, following her direction, not out of fear but from curiosity and trust. The crowd gasped. Humans and dragons alike watched as this young girl led a dragon through maneuvers that Zevik himself had claimed were impossible to perform under human guidance. Zevik shouted, tugging at the reins, trying to regain control, but Talmar ignored him. The dragon had made a choice, and Mira respected that choice. She kept her voice soft, her hands steady, guiding Talmar through the twists and turns of the course. At every gate, she moved deliberately, allowing the dragon to process her instructions without pressure. She watched Talmar closely, noting subtle shifts in balance, slight hesitation or tension in its wings. Each movement was a conversation, silent but full of meaning. The arena was filled with tension. The audience leaned forward, the dragons quiet and alert. No one had ever seen a human guide a dragon in such a way. Mira continued, whispering words of reassurance, her hand movements gentle but clear. Talmar responded, its massive body moving with grace and precision. The obstacles that Zevik had used to show his dragon's supposed loyalty now became a stage for Myra's intelligence and patience. Step by step, Talmar followed her guidance, proving that trust and understanding could achieve what commands alone could not. Halfway through the course, Zevik grew furious. "Talmar, obey me. Stop following her," he shouted, his pride wounded. Talmar hesitated for a moment, flicking its wings as if considering the choice, then continued to follow Myra's subtle signals. The dragon's eyes met Myra's, golden and intelligent, and she gave a small nod of encouragement. She understood that the dragon was testing her as much as she was testing it. This was not blind obedience, it was a bond forming in real time, built on recognition and respect. At the most difficult obstacle, a series of swinging gates designed to trip even the most experienced riders, Mira paused briefly. She let Talmar observe, giving the dragon space to choose its path. Talmar hesitated, then moved carefully, navigating the gates with precision. Mira whispered softly, "You can do this," and the dragon responded, lowering its body slightly and adjusting its wings with careful balance. The audience gasped again. Even some of the council elders leaned forward, astonished at what they were witnessing. Zevik's frustration became visible. His face flushed, fists clenched, but he could not force Talmar to obey. The dragon had formed a silent understanding with Mira, responding to calm, patience and observation instead of loud commands. Step by step, gate by gate they moved through the course together. Mira never rushed, never pushed. Her small hands and quiet voice guided Talmar, showing the dragon that trust was stronger than force, and respect more powerful than fear. When they reached the final gate, Mira extended her hand fully, signaling completion. Talmar's massive head lowered slightly, golden eyes meeting hers. It was a small gesture, subtle but unmistakable. The arena erupted in whispers and murmurs of astonishment. Humans looked at Mira with awe, recognizing that she had done what no one else could. Dragons tilted their heads, intrigued by this human who had approached their kind with patience and courage. Even Zevik had to swallow his pride and acknowledge the achievement silently. The council conferred briefly, then announced their judgment. Mira had succeeded. Talmar had responded to her guidance, completing the course under her direction. It was not submission in the sense Zevik had claimed, it was something far greater: acknowledgement, trust, and a growing bond. Mira had passed the test of loyalty, proving that humans, even small and orphaned, could influence dragons in ways the council had never considered. Mira stepped back, hand lowered but still open, allowing Talmar to move freely. The dragon remained close, golden eyes alert, wings relaxed but ready. Zevik glared at her, pride wounded, but he could not deny the truth. Mira had proven that courage, patience, and understanding could achieve what brute force and arrogance never could. The arena, once filled with tension and doubt, now buzzed with excitement and awe. As Mira walked away from the platform, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The bond with Talmar had been tested and proven. She had shown that loyalty was not commanded, but earned through trust, patience, and respect. The council and the crowd had witnessed the beginning of a new understanding, one that could reshape the relationship between humans and dragons forever. Mira's small, steady hand had started a ripple that might change the entire galaxy. The arena was alive with whispers and excitement as Mira and Talmar stood at the center, the final challenge complete. The council elders conferred quietly, exchanging glances, while Zevik stood to the side, pride wounded, frustration clear in his tense posture. Talmar's golden eyes never left Mira, intelligent and alert, wings flexing slightly in calm readiness. The bond they had formed was now undeniable, tested through patience, understanding, and mutual respect. Mira's small hand had proven more powerful than Zevik's arrogance, and the crowd began to sense that a new era was dawning. The council stood and addressed the crowd. "Today," one elder said, "we have witnessed something extraordinary. A human, small and orphaned, has earned the trust of a dragon through patience, courage, and understanding. This is not mere obedience. This is partnership." The words rippled through the arena. Humans whispered to each other in awe, and even dragons tilted their heads, observing the scene with quiet curiosity. Zevik's lips pressed into a thin line, unable to argue with what everyone had seen. Mira stepped forward, her gaze calm and confident. She did not boast or shout. She simply extended her hand to Talmar, who leaned closer, lowering his massive head in acknowledgement. The dragon's wings folded slightly, and its tail shifted in rhythm with her steps. It was a gesture of trust, mutual respect, and understanding. The audience gasped again, recognizing the significance. For the first time, humans and dragons were not separated by fear or dominance. Here, at this moment, a bridge had been built between the species. Zevik, though frustrated, could no longer maintain his arrogance. He approached slowly, trying to reconcile his pride with the undeniable truth. Talmar shifted slightly but remained attentive to Mira. Zevik knelt subtly, a silent admission that power and pride were not enough to command loyalty. Mira's calm presence had shown a different way, a way of understanding, respect, and partnership. The young rider's arrogance had been humbled and the crowd sensed it. Even dragons, usually quick to judge, seemed intrigued by this human's approach. In the days that followed, Mira and Talmar became a symbol of a new beginning. Humans who had long been dismissed or underestimated were now encouraged to interact with dragons. They learned that trust and patience could create bonds stronger than fear or control. Talmar remained by Mira's side, attentive and loyal, yet free to act on his intelligence rather than commands. Their partnership became a model for the council and for the growing alliance between humans and dragons. Training sessions began to change. Humans were no longer taught only to observe or survive. They were taught to understand dragons, to read their gestures, and to communicate in quiet ways that went beyond words. Dragons, in turn, learned that humans could be clever, patient, and brave. The lessons Mira had demonstrated in the arena, observation, respect, and courage, became central to these new teachings. Talmar and Mira worked together, showing others how to form bonds based on trust and understanding, rather than fear or domination. Zevik, though humbled, began to watch carefully. Slowly he learned from Mira's example. His dragon still followed his commands when necessary, but he began to recognize that true loyalty was earned through respect and partnership. He observed how Mira guided Talmar, how her patience allowed the dragon to act with intelligence, and how her courage inspired both humans and dragons alike. Though his pride remained, he could not ignore the lessons unfolding before him. The floating city, once a place of strict hierarchy and rigid roles, began to change. Humans and dragons moved together with a new sense of cooperation. Partnerships formed not out of fear or duty, but from understanding and choice. Mira became a symbol of this new era, a young human whose courage and patience had reshaped the relationship between species. Her small hand had begun a ripple that touched everyone in the arena, the council, and beyond. One evening, Mira stood on the highest platform of the arena, Talmar beside her, wings folded and head lowered slightly. The twin moons cast silver light over the city, illuminating towers, bridges, and floating platforms. The wind carried the soft hum of dragons and the chatter of humans below. Mira looked down at the city and smiled. The world was changing, and she had played a part in that transformation. Talmar nudged her gently, a quiet reminder of the bond they shared, a bond built on respect, trust, and courage. She remembered the day she had first raised her hand in the arena, daring to challenge Zevik's boast. At that moment, she had only hoped to prove that a human could act with intelligence and courage. Now she saw the impact of that choice. Dragons and humans were beginning to understand each other in ways that would shape the future. Young humans began learning alongside dragons, practicing patience and observation. Dragons grew more attentive and willing to cooperate with humans, recognizing that strength was not only in fire and claws, but also in courage, wisdom, and empathy. The council acknowledged Myra's achievement formally. She was no longer just an orphan girl in the crowd. She was a leader, a bridge between species, and a symbol of hope. Talmar stayed at her side, a constant companion and reminder that the strongest bonds were formed through understanding rather than force. Zevik, though still proud, had learned humility and respect. The city moved toward a future where humans and dragons could coexist as equals, working together for a common good. Mira knew the journey was not over. Challenges would come, and both humans and dragons would face threats and obstacles. But the foundation had been laid. With patience, courage, and respect, she had shown that even the smallest and most underestimated human could shape the future. Talmar leaned into her gently, and she stroked his snout, feeling the warmth and strength of the bond they shared. It was a partnership that promised adventure, discovery, and unity. As the moons rose higher, Mira raised her hand slightly, a quiet gesture of triumph and recognition. Talmar lowered his massive head in response, golden eyes glowing with trust. Around them, humans and dragons alike watched and learned. A new era had begun, a time when fear and pride no longer ruled the relationship between species. The galaxy was opening to possibilities neither humans nor dragons had imagined before. And it all started with one small, determined human raising her hand, showing the power of courage, patience, and understanding. The arena, once a place of competition and pride, had become a symbol of unity. Mira and Talmar stood together, ready to face whatever came next, side by side. The bonds they had forged would endure, teaching both humans and dragons that strength was not only measured by power, but by trust, courage, and the willingness to understand one another. A new alliance had formed, and with it, a brighter, stronger future for all.